What's up, humans? I'm Enzo with Frequency, and today we are going to connect some dots with constellations, our brains, some mythology, and some occult knowledge disguised as a Bible story. Now, this is going to be a heavy video packed with a lot of information because spiritual truth, as we so tend to call it, and as you probably know, has multiple layers. And we constantly circle back to uncover deeper meanings of the same things. And this breakdown is just that. It's a deeper understanding for a story that many people are already familiar with. And that is the story of the return of Christ. Now, as always, it is your responsibility to discern what you hold on to as your personal truth. Make sure you run everything through your higher self via your intuition and never accept something that someone else says without going through your own internal process. So if it resonates, integrate it. And if it doesn't, it's either not for you or not for you at this time. Simple logic. But with that said, pay attention. Here's some pearls. Now, for the start of this breakdown, we will brief on all the elements necessary to bring it all together. And we'll speak on the revelations and the infamous return of Christ in the clouds scenario shortly. But first, we need to look at some characters from Greek mythology. So let's bring in Pegasus, the flying white horse. Now, you've probably seen or heard of this guy before, and it is also a constellation. Now, next we'll need to look at the mythological creature called the hippocampus, which is derived from the word meaning hippo, which means horse, and campos, which means sea monster. So it's a half fish, half horse hybrid, a seahorse. And it is the same seahorse creature that Poseidon uses to power his chariot. Now, Poseidon himself is the Olympian god of the sea, earthquakes, and horses, and just so happens to also be the sire of Pegasus, the famous white-winged horse. Now, moving on from mythology for now, next we need to examine the hippocampus that resides in our physical body, which is located inside of the brain. Now, it is named after Poseidon's hippocampus. And let me just add a quick disclaimer here. I am not claiming to be an expert on the brain as science understands whatsoever. But neither is anyone who works with them directly every day. And the brain is still very much full of mystery. And what science lacks in understanding, metaphysics addresses. So this is both a metaphysical explanation from a spiritual point of view and some general understandings of its finite functions. Now, the hippocampus is a complex structure that has some interesting attributes, but the main focus and function is associated with memory and memory recollection. Now, the memories that are stored in this region of the brain are called episodic memories. And these are the memories of an autobiographical nature. So these are going to concern all of our life events and pretty much everything that we have ever done. Even those minute details that we didn't know we registered at the time, because everything is actually recorded and stored within our DNA and physical structure. And when I say everything, I mean all 13.8 billion years of this universe, everything. Now, for years, science thought we had what's called junk DNA, but there is no junk in our bodies. Science didn't know its purpose yet, and so they rendered it useless, but we are immaculately designed, so that's dumb talk. Nature doesn't waste anything, and the creator doesn't either, nor does it make mistakes. Now, Billy Carson has some excellent videos on this topic of storage within our bodies, and even peer-reviewed back science backing this theory of 13.8 billion years of stored data. And you can find that in the playlist on this channel under the Interesting folder, and I will also put a link in the description. Now, another important function is that the hippocampus also forms a cognitive map that can influence spatially separated regions within the brain. Now, this means that the dormant memories that are stored in the hippocampus can be recalled and transmitted to other regions of the brain for conscious use. Now, for this discussion, we are honing in on the cerebral cortex as final destination of interest. And this is because the cerebral cortex is associated with the highest mental capabilities that, well, humans have. These high-level processes include consciousness, emotions, reasoning, thought, language, and memory all of its own. Now, without these things, we're basically dumb. Now, the cerebral cortex is the outermost part of the brain that is wrinkled. And in case you ever wondered why our brains are wrinkled, it's to increase the surface area so that more neurons can live on there, because the creator is also hella efficient. Now, the cerebral cortex is mostly constructed of neural tissue that's made up of about 14 to 16 billion neurons, known as gray matter. Now, remember gray matter, if that from nothing else. And while it is a myth that humans only use 10% of our brains from a physical perspective, maybe not so much a myth from a metaphysical standpoint. I mean, we aren't accessing even remotely close to what's actually in there. Again, we still know very little about the brain in its entirety. Now, we know that the brain is a computer and it's an integral part of all our bodily processes. And we know that it houses consciousness. However, so does every single organ, atom, and molecule in our body. And contrary to popular belief, it is not the brain that houses the consciousness that makes us aware of self. That awareness resides in the heart, and this is why so many spiritual teachings are heart-centered, because that's where the divine spark dwells. But everything in existence has some form of consciousness. I mean, something is even as inanimate as a rock. And there isn't one specific part of the body that isn't aware of its purpose and function. A cell knows it's designed to do a specific task. Now, whether or not a cell is aware of what a cell actually is a whole other matter. But it knows it has a job to do, and it does it. And we actually have the ability to tap into our bodies at various levels of awareness, and this can be experienced directly with meditation practices that involve consciousness projections into those specific parts of the bodies. Now, the reason everything in existence has consciousness is because there is nothing in existence except consciousness. As Hermes stated, the all is mind, and all of this is mental. Now, we can't see consciousness physically, but everything that we do see physically is consciousness manifest into form. I mean, this is essentially what we are also. Consciousness is invisible and undetectable, just like God, because they are one and the same. Now, it's a simple concept to grasp when you think about it this way. A neurologist can't open a brain and show you a memory, but we don't deny their existence. We know that they are there, but memory recollection can only be experienced by the individual that has that memory. You can't find them, open it up, and see them at all. And really, it's the same thing here. So let's understand one other foundation, and then we'll get to it. Now, we know the source is responsible for all of creation. You, me, the stars, the planets, all sentient beings throughout infinity, all came from the one supreme power. And it's all deeply connected. All of it out there, so to speak, and all of this right here works in unison because it is all the same. Our conscious carnal minds are really the only thing that separates itself from all that is real. The subconscious mind, however, is really, that's where all the magic happens. Now, in fact, if you are familiar with magic practices, then you understand this concept. The subconscious mind is the very reason why everything is symbolic. And literally everything in existence is indeed symbolic. It really just depends on how much you want to observe it as to how much you'll see of it. Now, symbology is not readily understood by the conscious mind, but it's the primary language of the universe. Man made language with words for this reality. And just look back over time, because even language itself has drastically transformed over time, and it will continue to do so until it is no longer necessary for communication. And it's really already happening right before our eyes with the heavy use of abbreviations like LOL and emojis. And if you have kids, how many times have they come home and showed you their cursive writing skills lately? Probably not many, because language as we know it is changing to a more emotional based communication system. You know, something like using symbols that relay meaning. Sounds a lot like an emoji, huh? But all that to say, the keys and clues we find on the spiritual path are symbolic also. And that's how we have to approach these things if deeper understanding is what we are after. Anyway, so when you hear that you are the universe experiencing itself through your physical vessel, that is not an exaggeration, and it's something that you must come to understand at a soul level. Now, science can explain this by showing what our carbon-based physical bodies are actually made of, which is a bunch of star stuff. And astrology and the like sciences can explain this by the correlation and the positioning of the stars and the planets themselves. I am going to explain this using mythological creatures, the brain, and some cryptic texts from the Bible. Now, if you have not figured this out yet, let me enlighten you. Those stars, planets, and constellations are the signs, insight, instructions, and coded understanding hidden in symbolism. They actually all reside in our bodies just as much as they do the firmament. They're pretty much an owner's manual to the human body and how to operate it. And Genesis 1:14 tells us this directly when it states to let the stars in the firmament be for signs. So here is your sign. The Bible itself is a book of astrology. The three wise men who came to see Jesus when he was born were the Magi. The Magi were prominent astrologers from Zoroaster's area that carry on through today. Now, why would astrologers have interest in Jesus? Well, the entire Bible is an allegory and also follows the physical sun through the zodiacs. And Jesus is the representation of the physical sun, S-U-N, every bit as much as he was the embodiment of the Christ which we have in each of us. Now, this is why Jesus was represented in so many various ways. Jesus the Lamb is the Ram of Aries. Jesus the Fish is Pisces. The Virgin Birth is Virgo. The Lion of Judah is Leo, and so on. Now, the Bible is also a book of our human anatomy. Every astrological event or representation through the zodiacs directly corresponds to functions and components within our very own human bodies. And everything in the Bible can reveal these things using symbolic metaphors. Now, let me show you how this works. So, there are multiple verses on this topic of the return of Christ, but we are going to focus on two of them for this video. So, let's look at Revelation 19 verses 11 and 12. Now, we're going to first decode this in depth, line by line, and then we'll jump to the bigger picture and bring it all together and actually decode the return of Christ. So, Revelations 11 states, "Now I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse. He who sat on him was called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he judges and makes war." Now, some of this verse will make more sense later when we discuss this white horse, but keep this in mind for now. The kingdom of heaven is within. Luke 17:20-21 states this. So, when he saw heaven open, this was an internal event within his own consciousness, because there is no heaven outside of you. It is inside of us, and it is not a place but a state of consciousness that is available to everyone who seeks it internally through specific processes. Now, that level of consciousness would essentially take you to a different place that was only experienced and seen by those capable of vibrating at that level of frequency range. Now, this is what we know as heaven, and this is what was seen here. And to reach that level also includes the physical body transformation in order to be able to handle the frequencies of those higher ranges. Now, just like we know that there are more colors and sounds that exist beyond our ability to perceive them, we should also know that what we call reality and see as such works the exact same way. When your body is only conditioned to vibrate and receive in third dimensional frequency ranges, you will not be able to see what else is there. And reaching those level of frequencies, levels, or dimensions transcend both the human body and death. Now, the one who sat upon this white horse in open heaven is faithful and true, because the only way to open heaven is by embodying these higher qualities and being faithful and true to the process of mutation. Now, our physical bodies are the crucible for this alchemical process to take place. As George Washington Carey stated, we are literally all walking alchemical experiments, and the goal of man is to perfect the formula for the perfect human. And we will keep dying and coming back, trying over and over until we perfect this alchemical formula. Now, since death is an illusion anyway, the rules of the game are simple. Solve the formula or die. And solving the puzzle is what Jesus did, and the end result was the resurrection, the elixir of life, immortality. Now, this is our destined outcome as well, but you have to find the keys, which in this case can be considered the correct mix of your formula. And God designed it so that each person must save themselves by perfecting their own formula, but we are all alchemists. Now, there's no one coming through the clouds to save you. That is one of the greatest deceptions that man has believed in the past 2,000 years, because it tricked us to look everywhere other than the only place truth could actually be found. The elusive philosopher's stone and the elixir of immortality was hidden in the last place that man thought to look, in our very own physical body. Now, to wrap this verse up, we all know that the only one who can accurately judge and make war is God itself. And the same applies to what we call both good and evil, as we will find clearly stated in Isaiah 45:7. Now, let's keep this going and knock out this last piece on Revelations. Revelations 12 states, "His eyes were like a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns. He had a name written that no one knew except himself." So let's dissect this. His eyes were like fire because fire represents the presence of God. This is exactly why Moses saw God in the burning bush. Now, his head has many crowns because the way to open heaven is through the crown chakra, which has 1,000 petals, many crowns. And the chakra system itself is ultimately the synthesis for the 144,000 mentioned in Revelation 7:4. Now, I have another video on my channel explaining this called The Mystic Bible if you want that breakdown. But no one knew his name because it was God knowing itself through this individual. And as we all know, no one can utter the true name of God. Now, this was simply saying that he knew himself as God itself, the universal intelligence. Another way to say this is he became a fully realized God being. So, there it is. The Revelations verses explain that has fooled millions of people for centuries, myself included. Now, the Bible is not literal in man's understanding, but it is kind of literal in universal symbolic language. The literal meaning is encoded with symbolic meaning because, again, that's God's language. And that's part of the game that we are all playing, the very same game that we all signed up for. Now, I know that was a lot of information, but now we will start to connect it all. So let's jump back to Greek mythology. Pegasus, this white-winged horse that is sire of Poseidon, just like the hippocampus that led his chariot. Now, for context in this discussion, all you really need to know about Pegasus is what was said. He is the white-winged horse and is also a constellation that God told us would be for a sign. Now, as you can imagine, having wings means he flies through clouds, and clouds themselves are either white or gray. But let's break down this hippocampus hybrid. Now, how did a mythological seahorse hybrid end up being named as a particular region of the brain? Well, that's easy, because remember, hippocampus means seahorse creature. Now, here's what a common seahorse, as we know, looks like next to a picture or a side view picture of an actual hippocampus in our brains. So as you can see, they look very much alike, and so the name does pretty well. It makes sense, right? Now, for the record, Julius Caesar Arrhenius is the one who named and discovered the brain's hippocampus in the 16th century. But while hippocampus was eventually the chosen name, there were a few different nomenclatures tossed around with this discovery also, and a couple of those, two of them, are interesting. Now, one of them was white silkworm, and the other one was Amon's horns. We'll bring these up here in just a minute. Now, here's the part where you need to start looking beyond what is in front of you. Because most people believe that mythology is, well, a myth. But it's very interesting that this so-called myth just so happened to have these details, right? Like that Poseidon just so happened to have a chariot driven by a creature that was an exact replica of a part of the human brain. So much so that we named it after it. But you have to remember, we're dealing with the creator of all that is. It knows everything there ever was and will be, and even all the myths and mythology, because it created every single bit of it. So why wouldn't it use its own creations as signs for itself to find its way out of the matrix, which is what we're all doing? Because it also created the matrix, because this is a challenge for itself. It's an experience. And the creator's meaning of life, so to speak, is not something that we can readily understand at this stage of our evolution. But to simply exist and experience itself is the ultimate purpose. And it does this through us and all that it creates. So humans are one way for God to experience itself and have form. But we are now remembering these things now that we are entering the age of Aquarius, and the return of Christ is the remembrance of this entire concept. So when the Bible said that the Christ was returning in 2,000 years, that never meant Jesus himself was coming back. That meant we would remember that divine spark in each of us called the Christ. And right now, the return of the Christ is happening right on time. Now, we call it ascension or the Great Awakening, but what's really ascending is our level of awareness, which will also change our physical structure and our abilities to create with universal laws. Earth has been a gradual learning process to develop these things. The end game of the human is alchemical, and the creative playground is magic, the two highest forms of science available to man. So that's really what all this is about. But remember that hippocampus in our brains we discussed is a vast storehouse of knowledge. The knowledge stored in that little structure is the very knowledge of our true selves, the Christ. The symbolic meaning of Christ coming through the clouds on a white horse is literally the activation of our hippocampus and the information that is stored in there, because that's what the hippocampus does. And the seahorse is connected in our brain with what is called white matter tracts. This is how it connects to other regions of the brain. Now also remember that one of the nomenclatures for the hippocampus was white silkworm. Now, as we also discussed, the hippocampus can send its stored information to the cerebral cortex, which is responsible for all of our highest mental capabilities, and that means that we can consciously use the information. And then also remember that the outer region of the brain where the cerebral cortex is located contains what's known as gray matter. So again, as we all know, clouds are one of two colors, either white or gray. So the return of Christ in the clouds on a white horse literally translates to the memories stored in the hippocampus, which is the white silkworm or seahorse, will be sent to the cerebral cortex for our usable mental faculties, because the stored memories move through what's called white and gray matter tracts throughout the brain structure. These are the clouds, and riding the horse simply represents Christ's consciousness moving from the hippocampus to a usable part of our awareness. You are the only one riding that horse, metaphorically. You are Christ's self, thus leading to victory and opening the heavens. So there it is. Underneath it all, it was never about a man coming to save you. It's a metaphor to explain an internal physiological process that occurs within our very own human bodies. And the very stars created above, along with all these stories of mythology and all these signs, are keys to crack the code. The entire Bible applies to every part of our body in this exact manner. Now, another quick example of how this works would be Moses splitting the Red Sea while taking the Israelites from Egypt. That's also a metaphor for the separation of the right and the left hemispheres on the brain. And yes, there's an entire story on that as well. Even Egypt and Israel have a hidden meaning that have absolutely nothing to do with any specific group of people. Now, we need to understand these things in order to know what needs to be done for ourselves personally. This is how we are going to save ourselves, because there's no such thing as a savior outside of you, and there is nothing that is out there in the universe that isn't represented within your very own body. Now, the last thing, and we'll close this thing up, every cycle into a zodiac brings on a new era. Now, we just entered Aquarius from Pisces, which, by the way, here's a map in the sky, half horse, Pegasus, half fish, Pisces, riding right into Aquarius. But each new era also brings new dispensations and ways to try to get humans to wake up. New religions, new figures, etc. And we are in a new cycle now, and one of those leading this cycle is Saint Germain, which is one of the greatest alchemists to ever live. And new methods and techniques are coming, and just watch. It will seem that suddenly a bunch of people are going to know who Saint Germain is soon. But this is why we have different religions. They were formed at each new era to relate to the people of that time in a way that was best suited for them. The change into Aquarius is why suddenly many of us seem to have profound new ways of connecting with the divine that oppose the traditional religious methods. And this is why the world is seeing so many drastic changes, well, right now as we speak. Now, in closing, earlier I mentioned that the hippocampus had a couple interesting nomenclatures: the white silkworm, which we addressed, and the other was Amon's horns. Now, here's how it works when I talk about each new era coming in. The Egyptian era was much different than that of Jesus' time, and Amen-Ra was a well-known figure during that period. Now, here's a picture of Amen-Ra with horns, and from a top view, as you can see from this angle, his horns, just like Poseidon's hippocampus, looks exactly like the hippocampus in the brain. Also, here's the internal structure of the hippocampus, and I'll be damned. What do we have here? Those little triangle cells in our bodies are called pyramidal cells, which goes right along with the Egyptian times. And as we all know, the eye of Horus is actually the pineal gland. And that's because for that era of existence, they needed their own versions of the stories that would resonate with the people of that time. And so, this version of the never-ending story will continue until the perfect man arises through the alchemical process and literally brings heaven on earth. Nothing in this world is what it seems, my friends. So, question everything and always think for yourself. Now, I will leave you with a question to ponder. Is it possible that we are just on earth live-action role-playing out various functions of our bodies through stories and metaphors with the blueprints and the stars? That's for you to decide, but I appreciate you spending a few of your earthly moments here with me today, and until next time, I send wishes for a life full of peace profound.